Hey everyone, this is going to be a preview to a longer series on generalized first person perspective. I'm going to call it Beyond the Stream of Consciousness. The stream of consciousness is basically grammatically restricted. And this is something that I figured out when I was trying to faithfully describe my visceral experiences of paranormality in the first person perspective. I thought to myself, well, when I'm experiencing something, I'm not necessarily always using a subject predicate partition. I'm not using the full grammatical list of rules that I have to follow in order to express some things. The expressions are much, much more rapid and chaotic and fluid. And this caused me to become frustrated with reading in general. I liked reading third person perspective. I liked reading poetry. I liked reading prose, which was not in the first person perspective. I liked reading memoirs of the first person perspective. But when it came to stream of consciousness, it felt a little bit artificial and lethargic. The expressive tempo wasn't actually faithfully capturing or even approximating ordinary conscious experiences. And that's because subconscious grammatical operations are not being traced in these sentences. We're using well-formed formulas as opposed to what I now call proto-formed formulas and words, proto-formed words. Now, respawn is the phenomenological narrative which inaugurates an attempt, not necessarily successful here, at grammatically generalizing the first person perspective, using tracing subconscious grammatical operations in the actual terminal outputs, which are these sentences. And this is the published book. Now, there's a little bit of damage there, just disregard that. Now, I made it quite large. It's basically the size of my face and neck. And I didn't put my name on it. The title is on the side here. And I didn't put anything on the back because my authorship, and actually I have co-authors who helped me to generate the generalized first person perspective in the pre-writing phase, are not of import relative to the actual text. And so, I created a Patreon profile in order to release it to free members, no charge required, PDF, and I advise you not to purchase the hard copy unless you enjoy the PDF. I'm working on the Kindle, etc., but the hard copy is $15, and I was hoping to make it something like $5, but Amazon reported to me that it costs $10 to produce the actual book, and since they, extract, I think it's 40% royalties, which means they need to make a profit off of it. The cheapest I could make it was $14.50, which means that by making the price $15, I'm earning a whopping 50 cents. And, money is actually not important to me at all. I would make everything absolutely free if I could. It is free on Patreon, and I actually have a profile on academia.edu where it's been free since 2019 in rough draft form. But that's the long and the short of it. Now, I'm going to just read I'm going to show you the little Amazon profile and read, here it is, the introduction. Now, the introduction is actually 25 pages explaining what protoformed words and protoform formulas are and what they do, right? What is their structure and what is their function? Here is a little preview to that. So I'm just going to go ahead and read. Here's the cover. This is actually a trail near where I grew up, and well, I won't say too much more. Now, for those of you who are actually interested in the plot is actually very simple. The main character's entire family has died over the course of 20 years, and the main character, suffering from suicidal depression, takes a rather large dose of San Pedro cactus, this psychedelic cactus which contains mescaline and other compounds, as a last resort before basically killing himself. And I won't get into it any more than that because I don't want to spoil it. There will be a sequel. I'm not going to disclose whether that sequel will be of the main character or not, but there will be a sequel. It's already largely written. It's not written in narrative form, and I'll leave that there. So here we go. Respawn is an attempt to grammatically generalize the first-person perspective, characterized by phenomenological narration designed to approximate certain aspects, notice, to verbally approximate certain aspects of subconscious mentation. You can't actually approximate. You can actually capture subconscious mentation in text, first of all, and you can't even capture it in natural language. You need perceptual, emotional, and behavioral language, which doesn't involve words and things like that. Anyway, characterized by this kind of narration, it presents readers with a unique challenge. And it will be a bit of a challenge. It was actually an extreme challenge to write it. It took me about 8 years on and off because I had to rewire my writing mind, and to actually use protoform words and formulas without putrefying the prose and achieving a fusion of lucid prose, which is what well-formed words and formulas strive for, and turbid prose, which is the chaotic subconscious traces of the grammatical operations. And so fusing them means that you're ascendingly integrating them so as to integrate self-conscious, namely the self-conscious, the stream of consciousness, self-consciousness, and the, fields of subconsciousness, which are not expressible in natural language, as we all know. All right, continue. I'm not going to add any more addenda. Historically, the first-person perspective has been synonymous with self-conscious narration. Authors guarantee output readability by equipping narrators with self-conscious monologues composed of sentential outputs known as well-formed formulas or grammatical sentences. Yet, where subconscious grammatical operations are accessed and exercised without regard for readability, one may, 1. Decompose sentential outputs into generalized phonemes, morphemes, phonosthemes, lexemes, and phrasemes, and 2. Recompose these units into protoform formulas. Rather than being gifted with a delicately curated sequence of well-formed formulas, readers are being tasked with dynamically coupling, recoupling, recoupling to the subconscious traces of grammatical operations. Traces, not the operations themselves. Once again, those can't be captured in natural language. Recognizing that literary expressions need not conform to the strict mandate of terminal well-formedness, which is readability, opens the door for protoform formulas to verbally approximate the subconscious aspects of behavioral, sensorial, memorial, attentional, intentional, ideational, and emotional qualia, along with their intricate interrelations. The non-terminal phase of grammatical generation, corresponding to the property of non-terminal protoformedness, which is perceivability, more general than readability, is broadly presumed to be introspectively inaccessible, uncontrollable, or unusable. Reinforced by the invention and popularization of computing devices whose functionality relies entirely on bitwise terminal symbols, terminal expressions, and terminal operations, this presumption has reached the status of common knowledge. In a literary context, it is taken for granted that non-terminal symbols, non-terminal expressions, and non-terminal operations are native to a reader's cognitive apparatus and therefore unnecessary to include in the text. Indeed, the standard hierarchy of computing languages may be extended easily to include the stratified units of literary constructs, where 1. The terminal symbols known as alphabetical symbols are the human equivalent of the numeric symbols or base units manipulated in base-level hardware and machine code, it follows that 2. Words and phrases may be analogized to the units of low-level assembly language instructions issued to a computer's terminal machine code. 3. Sentences, paragraphs, and chapters may be analogized to the units of high-level programming language instructions issued to a computer's terminal display extended assembly language. And finally, 4. Settings, plots, and characters being of the highest order with respect to informational content belong to the limit-level programming meta-language, in terms of which the human programmers generate, integrate, and calibrate their machine-independent abstractions. Note that this hierarchy is no more than a stratified system of terminal symbols, this computing hierarchy, terminal symbols, terminal expressions, and terminal operations. So we're relaxing this hierarchy from terminal symbols, terminal expressions, and terminal operations to their non-terminal analogs, tracing those analogs through the subconscious traces of grammatical operations. The traces are the decomposed, well-formed formulas into protoform formulas. They're decomposed through the units that I mentioned above here, which are phonemes, morphemes, etc. So don't worry, the introduction carefully, gently carries you through this generalization or relaxation. However, relaxing the first-person perspective to include protoform words and formulas in addition to their terminal counterparts causes considerable growing pains. As I mentioned, this caused considerable growing pains in me and even writing this. Initially, Respawn was a 500-page bloated draft, which was completely rewritten. And this is something that I address in the afterword that I may read in a second. These growing pains are not to be misinterpreted as natural reactions to sloppiness or word salad. So careful. Took me 8 years to put this together, and I don't think that any of this can be interpreted as word salad or sloppy if you actually read the introduction to phenomenological narration carefully and grasp the generalization it presents. Now, generalizing or relaxing readability to perceivability, reading being a highly specialized sub-operation of perceiving, cues certain morphological, meaning word-related, grammatical, meaning sentence-related, and typographical, meaning formatting-related relaxations. This introduction to phenomenological narration in no way qualifies as a contribution to linguistics. It merely invokes established results and well-defined classifications to explain the role of protoform words and formulas within a generalized first-person perspective. So we can think of stream of consciousness and memoir-type narratives as specialized, using a morphologically, grammatically, and typographically specialized first-person perspective. This generalized first-person perspective is so named because its morphology, grammar, and typography differ markedly and include their specialized counterparts, but recruit them only where clarity is required. And so that's the lucid aspect of fusional prose, which incorporates lucid and turbid prose. So it's actually not that lengthy. It's 177 pages. I put the language English. It's primarily in English. There are some Spanish sections which are translated immediately after. And the translation is color-coded in blue. Shouldn't be difficult to decode. And this is part of a series of. I'm going to publish many, many books, some of which will be narrative, some of which will be treatises, some of which will be, different, under the title or the series titled Planetism, which is a socioeconomic generalization of capitalism, communism, anarchism, etc., socialism. And there's going to be an incoming series on that. Now, let me turn to the actual text. So before the introduction, I write, this narrative is prefaced by a gently technical, not harshly, it's gentle, technical introduction to its abnormal style. And so this is the first part that I just read here is repeated here. There it is. I cut out some sections because Amazon has length requirements. But this is an introduction to phenomenological narration, and the morphological, it's 3 sections. Morphological relaxation, whereby in yellow, specialized by the way, the colors are symbolic. Specialized first-person perspective here, generalized first-person perspective on the right, and I'm not going to go through that right now, and I'll scroll down to the grammatical relaxation here, same thing. What is the specialized first-person perspective doing? What is the generalized first-person perspective doing? And then finally, typographical relaxations. Apologies for the nauseating scrolling. And let me just read these because these are actually kind of easy to go through. So basically, in specialized first-person perspective, applies a constant typeface regardless of changes in tone, tempo, pitch, stress, and character. Whereas in the generalized first-person perspective, we use multiple, in fact, many, a myriad of typefaces according to changes in tone, tempo, pitch, stress, and character. Actually, Amazon gave me some problems with this because they were, complaining that there were too many typefaces in the document, in the finalized manuscript. But thankfully, they accepted it after I was going back and forth with one of the employees. That's one of the main differences. Secondly, specialized version partitions paragraphs with a high degree of strictness, whereas generalized version partitions paragraphs with a low degree of strictness. So there are sections I call phases, which don't skip any time, and they can be as short as a paragraph. You'll see in a second. Finally, the specialized version partitions chapters with a high degree of strictness, and which is characterized by nonlinear jumps in time, skipping over miscellaneous or unimportant plot irrelevant events, whereas, as I just mentioned, paragraphs and chapters are not partitioned with a high degree, but rather a low degree of strictness, characterized by the linear time intervals that we experience in our visceral reality. You can't skip any unimportant events in life as much as we would like to until you are discarnate, shall we say. Let me just read this little typographical relaxation blurb. So typographical relaxation is the least invasive component of the grammatical generalization of the first-person perspective. Of particular note is its partitioning of chapters with a low degree of strictness. In self-conscious narration, stream of consciousness, for example, chapters are often used to mark a non-linear jump in order to 1. Exclude plot irrelevant events, or 2. Extend the plot into multiple weeks, months, or years without requiring thousands on thousands of pages. Respawn replaces chapters with phases, these serving to mark transitions in mood, tempo, and theme, while preserving the linear state transitions of a character's terminal body. Including even the most mundane bodily events requires a one-day time span to exceed 100 pages. So the 177 pages is actually about a day and a quarter. This is an executive summary of what the generalized first-person perspective does to verbally approximate subconscious narration. I won't go through that. Now I'm going to go all the way to the end to the afterword, which is, it seems to be misformatted here, but this is the document that I needed to use to post the Amazon print version. So it's properly formatted, don't worry. Now the afterword kind of explains in a very brief page what it was like to try to write this book. And as I mentioned, I had two of my oldest, closest, and nature-loving friends who would regularly join me for afternoon runs, night hikes, beach outings, and other fun excursions. And apart from swapping jokes, stories, updates, and advice, we would discuss mathematical problems and philosophical paradoxes. Now, starting in 2015, I started recording our results in these notebooks through many different, methods. Poems, questions, diagrams, dialogues, maxims, fragmented remarks, nested definitions, formal derivations, and extended summaries. But eventually I recognized that every system of notation, whether it's formalism, prose, verse, staff, no matter how lucid or ingenious, can only vaguely approximate the most ordinary experiential processes. I became less and less satisfied with my journal entries. And I kept coming up against this basic conundrum. How can I convey, through inscription, aka writing, experiential processes which are intrinsically non-inscriptive? How can you capture visceral experiences, even ordinary ones, like brushing your teeth, taking a shower, walking, talking, drinking water, etc., using natural language expressions which are dualistic, which are separate from the non-inscriptive aspect of the experience? That's when I realized that at best, writing and even speaking can verbally approximate visceral experiences, whether ordinary or anomalous. Now, whether this method merits further application and adaptation is for readers and writers to decide. I'm going to keep using it, but whether or not anybody else wants to use it is up to them. And I will warn anybody who does want to use it, it is difficult to untrain oneself from using well-formed formulas and words into proto-form formulas and words. It's not a trivial task. It's actually much easier. A lot of the writings that are third person are much, much easier, even though they're technically more complex. The plot here is not complex at all. If the plot was complex, then the method could not be showcased properly. Now, I did publish under a pseudonym, and I also did not have an editor. Now, why didn't I have an editor? I chose to self-edit reading here for the same reason that most painters, in fact, almost all painters self-edit. Surrendering to aesthetic spontaneity makes for the most joyous journey. You know, you can comment, you can get feedback, but ultimately the painter's brush is the only object which touches the painting. And that's how I feel about my written works. So I hope you enjoy this labor of love, and I will be releasing a series where I showcase not just the introduction to phenomenological narration, but snippets of the actual text. Once again, please do not purchase this $15 very large. Why did I make it so large? So that you can immerse yourself. I want you to be able to immerse yourself in the text. And let me just find a section which shows how brief phases can be. So, as you see here, we have a phase called stalemate and another one called Twilight Meadow. Stalemate is one paragraph. Okay. So anyway, don't purchase this unless you are satisfied with the PDF that I released to free members on Patreon, and I'll link the academia.edu version as well. There's no need to spend any extra money. I really don't want your money. I just want to share this work. So expect much more soon, and thank you so much for listening.